Democratic State Senator Nathan Johnson of Dallas, thank you so much as always. We appreciate it.
Good morning, Jack.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the special session that we know starts on Monday. And so one of the first topics that the governor has been pushing is school choice. And so the Senate passed this the last time. And I'm wondering, from your vantage point, how are you going to try to stop it?
Well, I think the key to stopping it is making sure people understand it. And let's just start with the misleading names assigned to things like school choice. This is not about school choice. This is about vouchers. This is about transferring public dollars to private institutions to further private purposes and private agendas. It's nonsense. It's contrary to what we stand for in the state. There's a lot of bad things. So I want to start with saying that this is about vouchers. This is not about school choice. We have school choice. You have choices whether to send your kids to the local school that you're in the district of. You can go outside of the boundaries of your local school. We have different types of public schools. We even have charter schools that are part of this conversation. We're not missing choice.
And so why do you think this would be detrimental to students? Because that's what you're talking about, this hurting public school students, right?
That's right. And I'm glad you said students, because it is about students. Public education is about students. I don't think vouchers are about students. I think vouchers are about elections. I think they're about motivating a base and a misleading narrative and undermining the institutions that frankly do keep people together, that do cause people to vote in ways that cross party lines. So if it's really about students, I would want to do something that's proven effective. And if you look nationwide at voucher experiments, it's places that have followed the same populist bent, you'll see that they actually don't work. So whatever your political philosophy might be, I think we got to be grounded in fact. And in fact, they don't work. We found things that do work. All sorts of school reforms are underway. There are districts around the state that are trying different things. And if we're going to make the effort to change things, why would we leap straight into something that we've already seen doesn't work unless you had some agenda other than helping the students?
And, as you know, Democrats have joined rural Republicans in the House to block this previously. And so I'm wondering, have you had any discussions with House Democrats and rural Republicans about blocking it again?
Yeah, there are a lot of people talking. The fact that the governor is taking this political gamble suggests that there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes. And I do think it is a critical moment when legislators have to work together, have to talk to one another, have to have the courage to face rough political waters, perhaps. And sometimes that depends on us having each other's backs.
So let me ask you, because one of the arguments that the other side has said is the money should follow the student. So if the money follows the student, what's wrong with that?
Well, let's say we wanted to apply this to police protection. Let's have the money follow the person. Well, I'll get a voucher for a police force. You are not going to get any set of coherent, effective police force. What you're going to have is a bunch of little pop-ups. You're going to have scams. You're going to have people who are really good at stuff, and you're going to have people who aren't. In the case of our public schools, they have fixed costs. They're there. If you start sucking students out and taking the money with it, they're not going to be able to keep up with their obligations to their remaining students. Meanwhile, you're sending the money over to schools that have not performed very well, and that's putting it mildly. Many of those same kids are going to have to go back to the public schools, and we're going to have to spend more money to bring them up to speed. Here's one other kind of philosophical thing that's wrong with the money should follow the student thing. The student is in a public school system that we as a society, following what is enshrined in our Constitution, following what is also embedded in the Texas Declaration of Independence, the importance of a public education is in those documents, is in those founding origins. And if you're telling me that my tax dollars should go where somebody wants to give their kid an education in one religion or another, or extract themselves from society, that's not what my tax dollars go to. We all pay property taxes to school districts. We all have sales taxes that are sent from the state to our school districts to build a public education system. It's not to follow kids around to a bunch of little special interest schools. We all have the right, you talk about choice, we have the choice right now to go to private schools. That's fine. But if we're talking about public dollars, those need to go to public schools.
One thing that's not included on the call is teacher pay raises. And
Stunning.
so I'm wondering, I was speaking with Senator Creighton earlier, the chair of the Senate Education Committee. I asked him about this, and his thought is if this passes, if the school education savings accounts, vouchers, whatever you want to call them, pass, then the thinking is the governor would expand the call. What's your reaction to that?
It's a profane reaction that I won't express. It's not good government. It's not good government. It's a rather petty approach. There is a very, very controversial issue that a good proportion, I think most of the state already opposes. And as people learn more, we're going to have an even bigger proportion of the state that sees that this is a bad idea. And to hold what everyone thinks is a good idea hostage to a bad idea for your own political purposes, I think is very bad government. And I think we should all rail against it.
How surprised were you that teacher raises were not part of the call?
Moderately. I don't even know if it rises to the level of moderately. It's gamesmanship, really. This is gamesmanship. They want teacher pay raises. They just want to make all of us suffer and compromise and collapse in order to get there. I hope it backfires, and it's got a good chance of backfiring, because teacher pay raises are essential. And they can be achieved actually through just putting money into the basic allotment. It's as simple as that. Teacher pay raises is part of putting more money into public education. And if we put more into the basic allotment, it will go to all sorts of programs, including, I think, 35 cents of every dollar in the basic allotment goes straight to teacher pay raises. And we can address many of the other things that people think need to be improved in our public schools through the basic allotment. That would be responsible leadership. It would be responsible to, as in the bills I filed, to have more respect for teachers by giving them paid parental leave or free pre-K for their kids. Or we had more stable funding by basing funding on enrollment rather than attendance, or indexing the basic allotment to inflation. There's so many ways that we could really improve our public schools in a sincere, not populist, honest way. That's what I think we should be doing. Not a voucher plan that undermines our public schools solely for political gain.
I wanted to ask you about border security, because the governor laid out 3 measures that he would like. What's your thought on those as it relates to the state's efforts keeping migrants from crossing into Texas?
Honestly, Jack, things are happening so fast this week, I haven't read them yet. They're kind of a surprise call to the border. I will be reading a surprise call to this session. I'll be reading them. I'll be preparing for them. As what usually happens with things like this is there's some genuine concerns underlying the proposed policies, and they are warped into something partisan and ill-advised. I don't know whether these fall into that category. My job will be to look at them, work with my colleagues to see that anything that's going to move is as responsible as possible, which isn't always possible.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about is the governor's call to ban COVID vaccine mandates by private employers. The legislature passed a bill that would ban local governments from having these mandates for COVID vaccines. And so I'm wondering, the governor now wants to expand that to include private employers. You and I have talked about this before. So what is your thought on this?
Yeah, I think I would call it super stupid, because it's disingenuous and ineffective and inconsistent with what has previously been a notion of limited government, which is we don't interfere with private businesses. If an employer wants to require their employees to wear ties, then they can do it. If they want to require them to be vaccinated so that they don't have disruptions in their business, they can do it. This is private business. I mean, what happened to employment at will? I can fire you for any reason or no reason at all. It's astounding to me. And it's not like we have a big COVID vaccine crisis right now. None of my million constituents calls me and says, oh my gosh, my employer is requiring me to get a vaccine. That's just silly. This is another example of stuntery driving politics. I'm sick of it. And it's interfering with private businesses. It's big government, Jack.
And, the other side says this is about individual freedom. So what's your reaction to that?
You have the freedom to go work somewhere that doesn't require you to get a vaccine.
And so what do you make of the chances of this bill passing?
I don't know, Jack. I'm inside the tornado. I don't know what it looks like.
And is there anything else that you wanted to mention about the upcoming session? What about, there's a lot of animosity between the lieutenant governor and the Speaker of the House, and I'm wondering, what is your concern, if any, that on how that would impact, going forward passing of legislation?
I'm concerned that it will play a role. I just don't quite know what role it's going to be. We're coming fresh off of the impeachment trial, which also created a huge rift between the House and the Senate, particularly between within the Republican Party. And so when we talk about the issue of vouchers, which again sees divisions within the Republican Party and a rather unified voice within the Democratic Party, it's a very unstable political situation. I don't know how that is going to play out, but it does make it more interesting to watch.
And we'll all be watching when the session starts. And so I want to thank you, Senator Nathan Johnson, Democrat of Dallas, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack. I appreciate the opportunity.